Hey guys, Mr. McSweeney here to help you with camera basics. So I just want to get into a few things that knowing about this is going to help you understand what your camera does, what it can do, in hopes that when you go to take pictures, you understand what's happening and you can make some adjustments. Okay, so in this video, I want you to learn three things. I want you to learn about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Those three things are really what you can manipulate to change the way your picture is going to come out before you start editing. So when we look at a camera, and especially photography, what you need to realize is that that root word photo is light, like photosynthesis, how plants use light to make energy. Well, photography is using a camera to capture an image using light. All of that is measured digitally with numeric scales via the sensor, or if you have actual film, there's a different chemical reaction going on based on that. I know that sounds like a lot, but when you start thinking about photography as capturing what the light looks like, you're going to become a better photographer because you're going to better understand the tool that you're using. So the way this works is I have my camera here, and all cameras have, all digital cameras I should say, have a sensor, okay? So the sensor is what is going to pick up the image. There we go. All right, that took a minute. Now, do you see the little reflection right there in the middle? The camera wants to focus on me. That is our sensor, okay? So different cameras have different size sensors. That sensor is what is going to pick up the light and then help interpret what the light looks like. Hopefully that makes sense. When you think about a phone, phones have very small sensors because they just can't fit within the body of a phone, and they have to rely primarily on software to help figure all that out. Okay, so you have a camera with a sensor inside. The light is going to pass through the lens, hit that sensor. Your camera is going to interpret what that light looks like. It's going to use a different value scale, typically of red, green, and blue, to understand what the colors are, and then it's going to digitally impose that on the screen so you can see what that's all about. Okay, well, let's look at how your camera's going to do that and what you can do, because you can't really manipulate the sensor too much. There's one thing you can do to it, but otherwise what you're going to be doing is messing with the lens part of your camera. Okay, so first you have shutter speed. Shutter speed is one of the main things you're going to be manipulating because it's the easiest really to manipulate, and that is just how quickly the shutter opens to expose the sensor or the film and then closes. It's a very, very fast mechanism. Some cameras can go up to 1/8,000th of a second, so literally you wouldn't even know if it opened or closed. Most cameras are going to be 1/4000th of a second, being its fastest shutter speed, and then you can manipulate that to almost whatever value you want. You can have it open for a whole second, and that would be a long exposure. You can have it open for 30 seconds, and that's how people do nighttime photography. Or you can have it open for 100th of a second, a 50th of a second. And you'll see that when you start messing with shutter speed, it's going to represent it as a fraction. It'll be 1 over whatever. So manipulating shutter speed determines how long the sensor is exposed to light. So on a bright, bright sunny day, you're going to want it to snap open and close. If you're doing sports photography and you just want to capture just a microsecond, then you have a super fast shutter speed. If it's a cloudier day and you need to capture a little bit more light, you can slow that down so it's open for, 1/250th of a second. To us, that's still super fast, but for the camera, it's amazing how light will make an impact on the sensor. So that's shutter speed. Then we have aperture. Aperture is the thing that most people love. It is what portrait mode is based on when you're looking at smartphones. And what happens is you have an apparatus. They're lens blades. They are inside of the lens housing, and Aperture dictates how much open or how wide open the lens gets to allow more or less light to hit the sensor. So right now we have shutter speed, how fast those blades open, right, and close. Then we have aperture, how big or small the blades open to allow light to come in. Aperture kind of really affects two things: how much light is getting in terms of, is it a big opening or a little opening? And it also affects focus. So we have what's called depth of field. And depth of field is how much of the frame that you're taking a picture of is in focus. Okay. A shallow depth of field would be a shallow plane of focus. You can kind of imagine it like this. You see me right now, and this is the whole frame, what's behind me and kind of what's this space in front of me. The camera is going to use a plane of focus, and it's kind of like a slice. If there was a slice of space that was in focus, and changing the aperture is going to either decrease that slice and make it where less space is going to be in focus, or it's going to increase that slice and make more in focus. Why would you want that? Well, you want everything in focus if you're doing giant landscape photography and you want to take pictures of a forest, like a whole forest or a mountain. But if you're doing portrait photography of just like a person and you want to isolate them, then you use a shallow depth of field just to make sure that your subject pops out, and it's going to blur everything in the background. That's portrait mode on your phone. It just does it digitally. So decreasing the aperture, making that number go down, it's measured in f-stops. Most cameras, a good lens will be anywhere from the widest open will be like 1.8 or 2.8, and then you can close those things down to like f20 and get everything in focus. Most cameras will stick right around that like 3.5 to 5.4-ish range. How do you know which one to use? You take a lot of pictures, take 20 pictures of the same thing, but changing the aperture to see how that affects it. Okay, so while you might decrease the f-stop and make it smaller depth of field, so you get that like really isolated image of something or someone, and then everything else is blurry, you're letting a lot more light into the sensor. So then you might have to manipulate your shutter speed because now you're getting too much light hitting the sensor, and that's how you counterbalance this stuff. Okay, so same thing. If you make your aperture really, really tiny and you pump that f-stop up to like f9 and it's just a really tiny little pinhole that light's coming through, you might have to make the shutter stay open longer. Now there's a third thing that you can do to a camera, and that is changing the ISO. What is ISO? ISO is the sensor's sensitivity to light. Those range in a numerical value typically from about 100 ISO, and good cameras can go into the hundreds of thousands, which is just mind-boggling. You'll probably not surpass 3200. Okay, so somewhere between that range. The lower the number, the less sensitive to light the camera is. So right now, this camera has an ISO of 100. I set that specifically because I wanted the background to be darker. I have a giant spotlight that is literally 2 feet away from my face, and so I didn't care how sensitive it was because I knew I was going to put a light source just washing over my face. I wanted the background to be dark. So my ISO is really, really low. If you go out on a bright sunny day at noon, you want a low sensitivity because there's going to be just a ton of light. As the light goes away, you need to increase the sensitivity or increase the ISO and make that go up to 400, 800, 1600. Now, all of these come with costs, right? So if you increase the sensitivity of your if you increase the sensitivity of your sensor too much, you get what's called grain. And that grain can kind of distort the image because you're making your sensor too sensitive. and then the sensor doesn't understand what it's taking a picture of. That's why in nighttime photography, sometimes you'll take a picture and you'll see all these little rainbow color sparkles everywhere on your picture, and you're like, what is all this? They call that grain or noise because it distorts the image. Sometimes grain is a cool thing and you want that, right? Sometimes noise is a cool thing and you want that. It's not always bad, it just might not be what you want. So if you balance all three of those, shutter speed, how quickly the blades open and close, the aperture, how wide or small the blades go, and then the ISO, the sensor sensitivity, you can really manipulate your camera to get the best picture that you want because you're just manipulating light. I know this is a lot of information for only like 3 things, but you need to just take your time with it. And how do you get good with this? Take a bunch of pictures. If you take a picture of something, change the shutter speed, see what happens. Change the aperture, see what happens. Change the ISO, see what happens. Do all that in concert and see what happens. Add a light source. Maybe you want to add a big softbox to help you out. Or maybe you want to add a colorful light that is casting some cool hue just to add some fun to it. Photography is amazing because it's whatever you want to do to get whatever image you want to get to tell some special story. That's all we're trying to do. So take your time with this. I hope this video helps, and good luck.